From the city of broad shoulders, this is Chicago Unscripted with CBS News Chicago's Joe Donlan.
One of my daughters called me the day after the Super Bowl and said, "Dad, you have to do an episode on Kendrick Lamar's halftime show. Everyone is talking about it." And that's usually the case the day after any Super Bowl halftime show, but I can't remember anything quite like this. In the end, from what I'm seeing, it was the most watched halftime show ever. More than 130 million people were tuned in, and it seems everyone has an opinion. It was 13 minutes of music, and a lot was made of that, especially the now ubiquitous Drake diss track. But the performance went way beyond that, with messages sprinkled throughout the show, from the symbolism of Uncle Sam to all the crumbs, the hidden context viewers were left to decipher and discuss, which is what's ahead for us here. I asked historian Ernest Crim III to join me for his take on the social issues explored, the history lessons embedded, the racial references, the response to the show, and the roadmap he thinks Kendrick Lamar laid out for viewers moving forward. Class is in. Here's Ernest Crim III. Mr. Crim, how are you? Thanks for the time.
Hey, thanks for having me, Joe. I'm doing great.
Yeah, it's an honor to have you. I know I've wanted to chat with you since I saw some of your work on CBS Chicago last year, and I felt like this was the perfect opportunity to have you on. And I actually thought about getting a music critic maybe to chop this up, but there's so much symbolism and so many messages and so much history. I think you're the perfect person for this. But let's start with your upbringing. You grew up on the south side of Chicago. Tell me a little bit about what that was like and how it shaped your life and your career today.
Yeah, so I grew up on the far south side, 128th and Sangamon. First 19 years of my life. I had a great neighborhood. I think I saw everything, about the Black experience. There were some systemic issues, of course. There were some gang issues, of course, but also, too, there was a lot of love and community. I just always think of me and my friends playing basketball every day. It trips me out now when I ride through Chicago and sometimes I see an empty park. It's mind-boggling. And where I grew up, we were so far south, we didn't have a park near us. So, I had a rim, a couple of my friends on the next block on Morgan had a rim, so we would all just gather in the alley and just play for hours. We take a break, we go to Harold's, or sometimes we order some Beggar's Pizza. Me and my friends playing baseball, wiffle ball in the front yard, running inside to see Jordan hit game-winning shots and then running back out to celebrate and act like we're him. That's what my childhood was like, man, growing up there. And also, too, I had two great parents and a great older sister. Melody, Ernest, and my big sister, Nikki. They molded me. I was the youngest in the house, and I was just soaking up everything growing up as a child in the 90s. Unknowingly, I was also gaining a love for my history, Black history. Right. And I would say truly because my mom was an educator for 30 plus years when she retired from CPS. And my dad, I would say, implicitly taught me history through the music he always played. I'm growing up listening to Motown, James Brown, Earth, Wind and Fire, Marvin Gaye, Stevie Wonder, things like that. And he's having us learn, whose song it is and playing guessing games. And my mom has all these pictures of Black history around the house. So when I was 6, I was actually bused to Mount Greenwood. My sister was going there too, which is a predominantly white neighborhood on the Southwest side. And that was, a culture shock, but it wasn't so much because when you're young, kids don't really care. I knew the kids looked different and they knew I looked different, of course, but we just wanted to play together. And as kids growing up, we have so much in common, and I began to learn as I got older that it's only through the system that we live under and the cultural influences of the adults that we begin to grow apart, when we begin to feel like we're more different than similar. And looking back, I realized how just truly how insane it was, though, that I was a part of this program to integrate a school, not in the 50s, but in the 90s. And looking back, that shaped a lot of how I teach now.
Right. Relatively speaking, wasn't that long ago. I'm curious what you thought about your education. You went to University of Illinois to get your history degree. And I'm not rapping on the system, the education system, but I'm wondering, it seems to me that a guy like you learned a lot in the history books, but a lot more on your own and in your own research.
Oh yeah, definitely. One of the things I want to say to everybody out there, because I get this a lot, right? When I make content, people are like, "Oh man, I didn't learn this in school. My teacher, blah blah blah." In defense of every single history teacher, we cannot teach you everything. I was in the class. I often couldn't get past the 70s, and this was before the pandemic, right? We could spend a whole school year on 2020, right?
Right.
2024. But what a teacher should encourage you to do is want to do your own research outside of class. And that spark was ignited when I was in college. There are some things I didn't learn about in college. Shoot, maybe some days I was asleep. Who knows, right? Maybe I was asleep. When I first started college, I wasn't the best student, so I may have missed some of this information. But what happened at U of I was on the verge of flunking out.
Really?
And I so happened to take I was, man, first semester, I was playing basketball. Look, like I told you, I grew up playing ball every day. So then I come to school and I'm under the illusion that I have free access to a gym. That's what we think, right? Our tuition's paying for it. But it's right down the street. Me and my friends that I met at our dorm, we just played basketball all day after school. So we go to our classes, we meet at the gym, we go to parties on the weekend, all of that type of stuff. And then it's like, oh, I got a test. In high school, you just show up, get an A. In college, it wasn't the same. So by the end of that first semester, I'm on the verge of going back home.
Uh-oh.
So I said, well, let me try something else because I have to get my GPA above a 2.0 now. I took a Black History course, and for the first time in my life, I wanted to read without being forced to. I had been forced to read my whole life. My mom, dad, my grandmother especially, and I hated it. It was so boring to me because I couldn't imagine, why do I want to just sit still when I could be doing stuff? But after I took that first course with Dr. Clarence Lang, I wanted to sign up for more and I wanted to buy all the Black History books I could. In that second course I had with Gerald McWhorter, whose name is now Dr. Abdul Al-Kamat. He's also a Chicago native. He just lit a spark in me. And from that point forward, that was 2006, I have studied on my own dime to learn as much as I can. So at our best, an educator should make you say, wow, I did not know that. What else don't I know? And then you go down that rabbit hole.
Wow. Well, that's exactly why I wanted to have you on, Ernest. So let's get into it. Let's talk about the Super Bowl halftime show because everybody is. And I guess just to open it up, what did you think generally about the performance and not necessarily just the performance, but the debate over what it meant and why so many people were trying to decipher all the messages?
Yeah, I loved it. I'm a big Kendrick fan. Like I would say prior to like maybe the last couple of years or so, Kendrick was always one of my all-time favorites, but he's inching closer now. My all-time has to be people like Nas, just because of pedigree and just the overall career. But to me, Kendrick is getting up there. He might be 1A at this point.
Well, there's not much of a bigger stage than what he was just on.
Exactly. And what I appreciate so much about him is, besides the fact that we got to make sure people know he is technically a Chicago native because his parents are from Chicago. So
I didn't know that till you told me before we started.
Yeah. So he's our cousin. He's our Compton cousin. Okay. But I appreciate that whenever he does something, he has to make sure he puts full artistry in it. He doesn't just perform. I think when people think of rappers, you think of somebody on the stage just rapping a song with the song in the background and just kind of pointing fingers at the crowd, put your hands up maybe. No, Kendrick Lamar is very intentional about everything he does. And that's what a true artist does. To me, it gives credence to the fact that oftentimes we think about art as just being something that's merely painting or drawing. No, we call them music artists, hip hop artists. From the moment he touched the mic, the song he rapped that I wasn't familiar with, I think it's an unreleased song, set the tone for the day. There are still some things I need to break down because I think every sequence played a role. And I would imagine if you were even there, you probably didn't get it because some of the messages had to be seen from, the audience perspective at home. Like the fact that the stage was set up like a controller.
Right.
It was like the American game. And I've seen somebody even say Squid Games could have even been a reference. If you got Samuel Jackson in your halftime show, you already had a classic right there for me. So that's
right.
enough.
Well, that's how it started. Welcome to the American game. I mean, I guess you could take that to mean he was talking about the Super Bowl, but I didn't get the impression that's what he meant because you had the symbolism of the video game and then the real game, which is the game of life.
Exactly. The game of life. You can think of it, just in terms of the bread and circuses that sometimes sports can serve as being used as a distraction from the politics that are going on around the world. You could think of it like from a black male's perspective or a black person's perspective in general, feeling as though you have to play a game to acquiesce and conform to American society.
Right.
Because when Samuel Jackson is even interjecting, he's telling him these things that some of us in the black community may have heard before. Oh, no, no, that's too much. That's too much. That's too ghetto. That's too hood. Tone it down a little bit. They're not going to like that. So he goes through these different, sequences, and he plays some of his more commercial songs. And then he comes out at the end and says, forget that. I'm not going for it. I got to do this for my culture.
Well, that goes to another message, a visual message with Samuel L. Jackson playing Uncle Sam, but there were others who noticed certainly that it was really more like Uncle Tom. I mean, one critic I read said it was sort of a middle finger to Uncle Sam, saying, I'm going to do what I want the way I want to do it. Is that how you saw it?
Yeah, there's a variety of different ways. I think one way could, of course, just be literally Uncle Sam and understanding what that represents in terms of the American empire. And I think if you look at it from another perspective of just what Samuel Jackson, the variety of roles he's played, but one role in particular in Django Unchained, when he kind of played that Sambo character or Uncle Tom character, and just being somebody who's interjecting to tell him, you have to do this the right way. You have to stay in your place. You have to play this game. If you don't play this game the right way, it could be, detrimental. We need to make sure you stay in alignment. That's kind of how I viewed it. And I love the symbolism behind it. And I think what's even to me so artistic about it is Kendrick Lamar will never tell you what he wanted. Right? That's what great artists do. They'll never tell you what the full intention was. They'll leave it for you to figure it out. Even when the dancers first came out, we have to keep in mind that all of the dancers were men, right? You don't know to see that at a hip hop show, right? All the dancers were men. My first thought was Crips and Bloods, and I think there may have been a double meaning being from Compton, right? But then also the understanding that they represented the American flag, and black bodies were used to create this country, and then they dispersed.
Exactly. I was going to say, then they divided, which I'm sure was a message he was saying about the country right now.
Yeah. So yeah, exactly. Great point. So showing how divided we are, even within our community, showing how there can be division sometimes. And there's even the image that I point to, and I'm not even sure how long during the presentation he had the pose where he stood up firm while everybody in the flag was kneeled. But the first thing that popped up to me was August Lammer, who was a German citizen in the 1930s during Hitler's rise, and how there's a picture of him unintentionally. He didn't think somebody was taking a picture, but everybody's doing a Nazi salute, and he's refusing to do it. Mm-hmm. And he gets captured in that image, and literally he did that, but he grew up through the ways of Nazism, and he believed in it until he fell in love with a woman who was German, and he had to unlearn all of that. And because he was caught doing that, it literally ruined his life to the point where he was on the run for the rest of his life.
Yeah, right out of the gate, Kendrick says, the revolution is about to be televised. You picked the right time, but the wrong guy. And there are things, three things actually, I guess here, Ernest, to break down. Let's start with the first, which refers to another piece of work that said the revolution would not be televised. Translate that part of it for us to start.
Yeah, so Gil Scott-Heron, which some folks would say is one of the original rappers. If you listen to Gil Scott-Heron, it's spoken word. It's very poetic. It's very demanding. It's very classic and timeless. This tall, I would say, man, roughly 6'6", probably black dude with a fro, just speaking all these truths about the time that he lived in the 60s and the 70s, and just how relevant it still is today. When he spoke about the revolution will not be televised, literally there was an increase of coverage of the revolution that was going on in the streets of America. I mean, in fact, the correlation with Dr. King even said in 1963, the civil rights movement was the Negro Revolution. So with that call to action is the things that need to be done can't be actually shown or marketed to you. But what Kendrick is interjecting is saying, well, they picked me because of my popularity. They picked me because I'm a great artist, but I'm about to show you what the revolution could look like through that tool, because that's always a contradiction in it. And I think that's why Gil Scott-Heron wrote it that way, because if you use the media the correct way, now, of course, you can't go over the top, but there are certain nuggets you can give people to help them have the revolution of the mind that's needed to make our society a better place.
Yeah, it will be televised, or it's about to be televised, he said. So let's go to the second part where he said you picked the right time, but the wrong guy. We'll get to the wrong guy in a second, but you picked the right time. I'm assuming, again, you got to make, out of the message what you will, but he could have meant, right now, right here, right now on the stage of the Super Bowl or this time in American history. What do you think he meant?
Yeah, I mean, the right time. This is the most watched show in America, right? Even people who don't like sports are watching the Super Bowl. I think about growing up, me and my friends talking about the best commercials from the Super Bowl and just kind of comparing those and things like that, and how the halftime show has become this epic event, and how he is the first rapper to, as a solo artist, perform, right? When people think of the halftime show, the right time, we thinking about Michael Jackson. We thinking about Prince. We thinking about Aerosmith, legacy action, things like that. So it's the right time, but you picked the wrong person, because when I go on this stage, I'm doing it for my community and culture first and foremost, and I want to give them a message that tells them what we should be thinking about and considering moving forward.
Oh, you think he was talking about himself then?
Oh yeah,
and the message he was about to drop. Okay, because I'm sure you've seen and heard people on social media who thought he was talking about Trump.
Oh well, I haven't seen that perspective, but I could see that because with Trump watching him and the angle that he veered towards, it definitely would be viewed as the wrong time for him. What I think is interesting too is when Kendrick found out, or whenever it was announced that he was going to perform, it was September.
Right, it was before the election.
Yeah. So I even wonder, did they start planning that political angle prior to or after the election? And also, too, we got to think as a historian, I wonder how this would have been received if Kamala Harris was president. I don't think it would be viewed as polarizing.
Why not?
Well, I think there's this assumption that if we have somebody in office, especially if somebody who looks like us in the Black community or is a Democrat, I think there's there's more of a feeling of safety and comfort by a lot of folks, people who maybe in my community, maybe who are liberals or Democrats or whatever. And even though a lot of these issues would still exist, I don't think that we would view his performance from the angle of it being subversive to the system. I think people would look at it more so as being a direct shot to Drake, and that's it. And I think Drake wasn't really even the target of this. Drake was just representation of something bigger.
Well, he was the last few minutes of it for sure, but I think it's fair to say if you walked away from this performance thinking this was a 13-minute diss on Drake, you missed a lot of messages.
Yeah. And what Drake, and oftentimes with art, right? Because Kendrick talks about this in a recent interview, and he says he treats it like a sport. So it's an art, but it's also a sport to him. So the attacks towards Drake really represent to him, from my perspective, someone who, they look like us, but don't really have a true appreciation for the culture and what it's about. And what the idea is, we put culture over commerce, people over capital. And Drake represents the person who has been able to capitalize and commercialize this art to the highest degree we've ever seen without a true appreciation for it. And the Kendrick, quite frankly, it's not simply a black and white thing. It's are you for the people or are you not for the people? You don't have to be someone who grew up with a rough life and poverty to be a great rapper. Although some people will kind of play on that tongue in cheek, the most important thing is truly to be authentic to who you are. We think about people, again, with Chicago, and I'm speaking more so of older Kanye. When Kanye first came out with College Dropout, the love and appreciation he got from that era was simply because he was being authentic as somebody who was a fashion dude. He grew up in the hood, but he didn't really he wasn't really a part of that culture. He was somebody who went to college and things like that. So it's more so about being true to who you are. And if you're not being true to who you are in hip hop and you're capitalizing it, you're literally leeching off the backs of people who have struggled so that this art form could exist. This art form was created to get kids off the street.
Yeah, USA Today put it like this. They said that Kendrick used it as a vehicle to attack Drake's presence and status in the industry, which he said is one of a colonizer, someone who tries to ingratiate himself in black culture and try on for size without really being of the culture.
Yeah, oh man, that would hurt me if I was Drake and I read that, but that's an accurate take. And I think, again, it goes back to even, just this perspective of within politics, oftentimes, and I'm going at this from probably with how Kendrick's viewing it, we can't just assume that just because, somebody looks like us, whether it be in art, whether it be in politics, whether it be as a teacher, that they're going to do something that fully supports us. And again, going back to the Uncle Sam character or Samuel Jackson character, maybe possibly being an Uncle Tom, just because somebody looks like you visually or represents you doesn't mean that they're going to actually represent your best interest. And I think it's mentally, psychologically a call to action to say we have to be careful about who we give, the so-called passes to and embrace fully in our culture without actually understanding what they hear from what they try to do. It should be really a call to action to all hip hop artists because there are people who, because if we're being really honest, Drake, for the most part, in terms of music, the music is really harmless, like it's more so what he represents. But there are a lot of artists in hip hop who make music commercially that is very harmful to our kids, to the community, and just what we want to represent moving forward.
Well, let's go back to Uncle Sam and Samuel L. Jackson's character, because he comes in at that point. At one point, it says, too loud, too reckless, too ghetto. And then he asks Mr. Lamar, do you really know how to play the game? Then tighten up.
Yeah, that rings true to a lot of Black folks. I would say mainly in the professional world. I think of growing up and being told that you should have to wear your hair a certain way. Then you should dress a certain way. You should talk a certain way, because if you do these things, if you check these things off, then you'll be treated better. Then you'll be able to survive. And then that interaction with somebody in authority, whether a police officer or your boss, won't turn the wrong way. So I think of that. And that's why I think it can come from both angles, because we also have to think about why would Samuel Jackson say that? Who taught Samuel L. Jackson to say that as that character? And that's something that he would have learned from the broader white society that said that Black folks have to literally walk on eggshells just to survive.
Yeah, and then we transition into the SZA performance, which I think is a little more mainstream, and it was a huge hit from the Marvel movie, Black Panther. And then Uncle Sam comes back and says, that's what America wants. Nice and calm. You're almost there. Don't mess this. You can tell he's sort of pushing the boundary, and he knows what's going to happen next, which is the Drake diss.
Yeah. What's so funny too about the SZA song is, so I've been listening to Kendrick since the first album, like Section 80, before he got with Aftermath. And even funny, with that first album, he had a Chicago native, GLC, on there. So basically, like, I've been a fan of Kendrick for a long time. And my kids, I would play some of the clean versions of the songs. They were kind of like, okay, he's cool.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm telling you, when they found out about that song he had with SZA, that Luther song, all of a sudden they trying to compete with me for being the top fans in the house, right? And I'm bringing that up because whenever we talked about the Super Bowl, they say, "Oh, I can't wait to see him perform that song with SZA. I can't wait to hear him see." Like, that's literally one of the crossover moments. Or also too, They Not Like Us, when they came across that song and they heard it and heard it on TikTok, they don't have really know what it's about, but it's catchy. Kendrick never really veered into the realm of trying to make something that was strictly commercial, strictly catchy, or strictly for the clubs. He was able to transcend these boundaries in an artistic manner that did not acquiesce to a typical radio song. So when he makes that Luther song and even the Black Panther song, I mean, that's Marvel, that's Disney. It seems as if making something that's more cookie cutter, when in fact he's still embedding those same messages in it, but it's just being delivered in a different way.
All right, let's go to a more overt reference in the performance, and that was where, just before Not Like Us, he started with the 40 Acres and a Mule. This is bigger than music. I'm wondering, how many people do you think who saw that are familiar with it, the Civil War history of 40 Acres and a Mule?
Man, I would say that most folks who are adults in the Black community knew what that was about. I don't know if a lot of people outside of our community do, though. Whether they're white or otherwise. Being truthful, it's not something that's really taught, right? In the history books, in the history curriculum that I taught out of for 12 years, the things that like that were things I had to add, right? We'll talk about slavery ending, right? But even I think that terming is incorrect, because I would say chattel slavery and from that era ended, or I would say slavery was now transitioning to the prison yard, is what it literally says in the 13th Amendment, right? But we don't even discuss oftentimes that Black folks never received the reparations, right? The former enslavers received reparations. And then, of course, Abraham Lincoln's assassinated, and his vice president, Andrew Johnson, undoes all of that. We
Right.
don't
It
often
was
hear about
supposed to
that.
happen, but it was rescinded.
Exactly. And I would say too, like for a lot of folks from my generation, maybe millennials, I mean, if you didn't learn about it in school, Spike Lee taught you about it because his production company is literally 40 acres and a mule. So, and I think that again speaks to what Kendrick was trying to do. This is not just a diss towards a Drake. This is not just me performing. This is us reclaiming what is rightfully ours.
But it's undeniable that Not Like Us is a blatant diss to Drake. I mean, I'm sure you know about the beef between these two. Did you have any doubt? Because it sounded like at some point he might not sing it. He even sort of said, I know they like to sue, but then he just launched into it. He had to sing it, right? I mean, that he just won 2 Grammys for it.
Yeah, I think he had to. I think the song was, so again, Kendrick always had the potential to make a song like this. Never really tried so much. And you have to think about how rare it is for somebody in the midst of a battle. So they're going back and forth with songs. When you craft a hit like this, that's something that might come out on this wasn't even on the album. So I have to even wonder, like, what was the process? Like, because when he speaks in these interviews, even on his songs, he's treating it like he's an athlete, waking up, running miles, writing songs in the studio all day. For him to be able to deliver something like this and for it to pop the way it did, he ultimately had to. I think, of course, people who are diehard Kendrick fans, we could have picked on a few other songs. Like, man, we wanted to hit all right. Man, we wanted to hear some songs from, Good Kid, Mad City. But I think just the climate and the fact that that song catapulted him to another level, not artistically, but commercially, he had to give it to people. And also, too, I think that it represents somewhat of a knockout punch, because then he follows it with TV off, which when you bring it back around, him saying the revolution will be televised, and then the game over at the end, to me, it brings it all together.
Well, you talk about some of this stuff being really hurtful for Drake. Then on top of that, there were a couple of other little crumbs that Kendrick dropped in there. The first of which was SZA, who was an ex of Drake's. And then all of a sudden, Serena Williams pops up, who also at one point dated Drake. Can you imagine what he must have been thinking watching this?
Man, I would hope that he wasn't watching it. That was my thought. And again, they're on a level that few will be on, but commercially and everything. I can't imagine having battled with this guy over the course of last year and having taken the type of shots I did if I was Drake. I couldn't imagine just sitting down and watching that. And I know you have to kind of know what's going on, but I'm sure there were some people in his record label that were able to deliver the message. And in fact, I think he may have been on tour. Even if he didn't see it, it has to hurt. It has to hurt because Drake has never, even though you could say he's lost some battles in the past, he's never lost a rap battle with somebody on the same level as him like this. And in fact, the time that a lot of people recall is when he got into a battle with Meek Mill and came away successful. So I think for him, he probably thought he was elusive in this sense. All of this has to hurt, because even what that represents with Serena Williams is this bigger message of how she was reprimanded for doing that, I believe, during the Wimbledon competition.
Right.
Before,
yep.
right.
The Crip dance.
Right. And then even the message of, he had on the first song on his new album, he says, "Don't let no white comedian talk about no black woman as law." That's even, to me, a reference of we have to let black women be as they are and express themselves and defend them.
Let's talk a little bit about the response, Ernest, because there was a whole lot of it. And on the subject of black women, I saw a good friend of mine who posted on Instagram that she didn't care for the show. And I think part of her point was that if you have to search this hard to figure out the message, you missed the message. It should have been much more obvious than it was.
I would disagree. But I understand the sentiment, because when you think about a halftime show for the Super Bowl, yeah, you think of just like, because typically, again, we're talking the Super Bowl. Let's do some more Black history. The Super Bowl comes from literally a protest of Keenan Ivory Wayans' show in Living Color creating a halftime show on a different network. And the show did so well that the NFL felt they had to respond. And then they respond with more Black history with Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson, again, is the pop star of pop stars. Everybody knows Michael Jackson songs, right? So when you look at Kendrick, we the same age. We 37. You can literally say Kendrick is still he's still in his career as an artist. You don't retire. You know what I'm saying? Like Jay-Z's gonna probably drop something soon, right? Nas is still dropping albums, right? And Lil Cool J's dropping albums. So we don't normally see somebody like this of his on his level performing to maybe they're 50 or 60. So I get it from that perspective. But at the same time, I think that what better place, what better time, what better moment in 2024 with this context than deliver a message like this? And I've seen educators say, if I'm a history teacher, if I'm an English teacher, I'm stopping class and I'm analyzing this. When have we ever said that about a Super Bowl performance, man? This is truly art on another level.
Right-wing pundits weren't having it, Ernest. Here's some clips. The halftime show you just watched is clearly the regime's response to Trump's historic gains with black men. That's from Representative Matt Gaetz. Even though, to your point, Lamar was announced as the halftime show performer before the election. But here's another one. Raise your hand if you survived the Black nationalist Super Bowl halftime show. And then another, no one can even comprehend what he's saying. And most of these songs are completely unknown to the vast majority of football fans.
Man, that to me that's funny, because he to reference the regime, like the current president is the regime, you know. So I think it's funny. I think that's good because if you are making subversive art to a certain group of people, to a certain mindset, to a certain ideology, it's not supposed to be for everybody. That means that some people will be offended by it. And I think that if they are offended by it and they believe that it was, what black, whatever, I think that's good. I think it's good. I think that that's probably what Kendrick was going for. If Kendrick, look, if you saw Kendrick perform at the Grammys roughly almost 10 years ago in chains, that he wasn't just gonna come out here and do some sing-alongs, right? And to the point of the vast majority, the vast majority of people who watch football probably aren't listening to Kendrick, but Kendrick is undeniably one of the top artists in the world. He has songs that have gone diamond, but just how life is, not everybody's famous to everybody. So it is what it is.
It almost makes me wonder if you can go a little farther with the messaging of Not Like Us as a reflection of where we are in the country right now.
Yeah. And even to that point, the people who don't get it is simply because you're not like us in terms of the culture, in terms of your understanding, in terms of your willingness to truly sit down with art and dissect us. And I think also too, again, to your point of the song and the division that was shown on the stage, it represents where we are when everything. It's at the point now, anytime somebody black is involved in something on this level, they're viewed as some type of affirmative action, DEI hire. We saw those remarks even with Beyonce when she won Album of the Year.
Right.
Considering all the other times she lost it and should have won. So I think it just speaks to, the divisionary tactics that are used when we really, to me, as people, should be finding ways to come together.
I want to get to DEI in a second, Ernest, but let's just one more response on this, and I want to get your take. There was a young woman on TikTok who whispered into the camera, I just watched the halftime show with my white boomer parents, and it went right over their heads. Hopped on Facebook to see more of my elderly boomer family complaining. I couldn't understand a single word of what he was saying. If you were a fan of Kendrick, you would understand loud and clear. Kendrick took the platform and sent a message, and if you didn't understand that message was not meant for you. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I think that's accurate. And even for that creator, I would say that something like this provides us with a great opportunity to create conversation with people who otherwise are oblivious. There are some people who grew up, in isolated shells throughout their whole life and don't truly understand the Black experience. And maybe their kids are trying their best to learn so that they can be allies in this never-ending struggle. this is a great time to say, you know what, mom, you know what, dad, this is actually what it meant. Because sometimes those conversations can be uncomfortable. I speak to a lot of educators and people in different organizations who are wanting to do this work more. And oftentimes they say the hardest place to do is with my family because they grew up a certain way. Well, everybody's watching the Super Bowl. So now you have an opportunity to really sit down and talk to them about what this is, because usually it's not that way. We can just turn to our own separate stations, our own separate, go to our phones, have our own algorithms. But with football and then Kendrick, it's right in your face. And I'm glad he did it that way.
You said on your TikTok video, we're faced with fascism again now. Be bold, make a statement. Where do you think we are today on race relations, Ernest?
Man, that's a great question. So, I don't live in a bubble. So I would say that for those people who already felt the way they felt about black folks or anybody that's non-white, I just feel like they're more emboldened to act on how they were. I cannot say that things have gotten worse, but I would say that the representation or the outward expression of those feelings has gotten worse. Because knowing history, I can't say this is worse than the 60s. That would be a slap in the face, or the 1860s or whatever. But I will say that there is unfortunately less of an effort now, organizations and companies, out of a fear, right? There's less of an effort to try to bridge these gaps, to try to be more encompassing and welcoming, because there's a fear that they could lose money, a fear that they will, be blackballed or something like that. I think that for those of, we'll see in this season who is truly committed to building these bridges and gaps. The ultimate theme for everybody out there is, this is not a black and white thing. We're talking about a humanity issue. And we're talking about, if you are willing to continue to treat somebody a certain way or look at them a certain way, then what does that say about you? But then what does that also say about those in power? They won't stop when it comes for us. Like, this to me is a plan to aggregate as many resources as possible for those who are in power, and to disregard all working class people, all middle class folks, regardless of their background. I do believe there's hope, though, because I always got to have radical hope, of course, but I always have to look at the brighter side of things. I think this will be a call to action to people who have been on the sidelines, because it's obvious now. When you see somebody hailing Hitler at a presidential rally, we have to come together and do something about that and make sure our kids know at the very least that that's not acceptable.
What is it about this, Ernest, though, that it seems like all of these things have some element, at least, of plausible deniability? Elon Musk, hey, it wasn't a Nazi salute. He was just excited. And, I guess you can look at that and wonder what he meant. But again, a lot of what drives us apart is sort of open for interpretation. And this happens with President Trump a lot. You hear what he says, and then you're like, what did he mean? It's sort of hard to decipher sometimes.
Yeah, we are in, to me, it's like the gaslighting is on another level. I think that we come from based on my studies, especially referencing back to the 60s, when there was a feeling that was had about a certain racial group of people, let's say black folks in this instance, it was socially acceptable to just outright say how you felt. There was no retribution to call somebody N-word on the radio or TV or something like that, to have blackface and to do all these other different things. But after King is assassinated, you see people kind of moving back from that. So going to the 70s, going to the 80s, and instead of outwardly saying that word or that person, you might say something like welfare queen, or you might say something like thug, or you might say something like the inner city, or you might start to create these different terms, and that evolves. And then it becomes things like woke, and it becomes things like
Right.
I think that what we're dealing with is a lot of people are uncomfortable with grappling with the unknown. And the unknown is, like I said, I was bused to another neighborhood. Because of that, there is no unknown to me. I was exposed to different cultures at a young age. It wasn't just white kids there. There were Arab kids there, Mexican kids, Latino kids, you know what I'm saying? Kids who literally came from Poland over here, right? So when our kids, especially at a young age, are exposed to diversity, and I'm talking about all backgrounds, they're able to hear these things from politicians or otherwise and say, you know what? That doesn't make sense to me, because I got a friend like this, or I got a buddy like this, or a teacher like this. This type of racist, vitriolic behavior and mindset is able to grow in the shadows, the more we are isolated and comfortable with it.
Well, and now DEI, you mentioned, you have corporations who are backing away from their DEI policies. And I was thinking the other day, Ernest, it reminds me a little bit of the CRT debate. I've interviewed people who were upset about CRT, and I've asked them to define critical race theory, what it teaches, where it's taught, and which part of an actual syllabus do you find offensive? And they all struggle with that question. And I don't know whether this is a similar issue, in your opinion, to DEI, where I think maybe the policy is to try to encourage more diversity and inclusion, not necessarily hire people of color over white people.
Exactly. It's about trying to make things right. If we can't agree that slavery shouldn't have happened, if we can't agree that Jim Crow shouldn't have happened, we have to keep in mind there was no reparations for slavery, no reparations for Jim Crow. My parents grew up in the Jim Crow era. My grandmother is almost 90 years old. They lived through this. There was no coming together. There was no politician on a federal scale that said we have to make things right. If not for slavery, yet at least for the people who were literally beat to death, or who are literally, physically harmed. They're forced to take literacy tests just to vote. I think that the idea is, if we can keep that type of information in the shadows, then we can continue to divide this country. Because if the country stays divided, then those who are making the most money and profiting the most off of it can continue to thrive. The biggest fear, in my opinion, is not that, Black folks learn their history and then all of a sudden are going to, just all want to have a mass revolt. That's not what's happening. The idea is we want to know who we are so that we can be the best we can and make sure our kids know, and we can create our own things and not be bothered, right? But the biggest fear is that white folks, who are the vast majority of people in this country, will also learn our history and will refuse to listen to the lies they are taught by those in power. Literally, y'all, race was created in this country in the late 1600s because white folks and Black folks were on the plantations together for a little bit, and they would often run away and plan revolts together because they realized that they have this class issue in common. So they began to give white folks more benefits, more economic privileges, so that they could disassociate themselves with Black folks. And we see the same things happening now 400 years later. So if we can get access to this knowledge, the spark goes off the same way it went for me, and we refuse to keep being led by lies.
I think what worries me the most, Ernest, is that we're doing the work of our enemies to ourselves, when we should be on the same team, rowing in the same direction as Americans, with the same goals and aspirations and hopes. And right now we just seem to be so divided that seems almost impossible.
Yeah, man. I would tell you that one of the most powerful things I've ever experienced was in 2019, when I was involved in this PBS show called Divided We Fall, where I sat down with people from a different political view as myself, and we were forced to have conversations over the course of a weekend. Now this is understanding, again, I was bused to this white neighborhood, but by the time I leave that school, I'm not even developed in terms of my political and social ideology to even know where I stand on certain things. So as an adult, 2019, I'm like 31, 32. That was the first time I actually sat down with somebody who I knew disagreed with me and tried to have a conversation. And we didn't leave like all of a sudden all agreeing on the same thing. But what it did for me was say, look, we talk to other people who we disagree with more on these phones than we do in person, and we take the humanity away from it. We got to start on the foundational level of, what do you want? We want what's best for our kids. We can all agree on that. We want to be able to put food on the table. We can all agree with that. But for some reason, they're able to pinpoint the small little things that are different between us and make it appear as though we shouldn't come together. But like you said, this is the time more than ever when we should be.
Do you think it's a matter less of trying to change people's minds and just trying to understand instead where they're coming from?
Definitely. Understand where people are coming from. We'll never like fully agree. I mean, that's just not how things work. But I feel like we're often caught within the confines of, I would say, political sports entertainment. Everybody chooses a team. And regardless if the owner of that team makes sense, you just align yourself with that team because that's how you grew up. It's like, let's look beyond that. Let's look at the humanity of it all. Let's look at the players that are impacted. Again, if we can sit down as take the labels away and say, what do we truly want for society in our country? Now, there will be outliers. Some people, I don't want to have a conversation with somebody who has already, dehumanized me and feel as though I'm less than a person. But I would think for the vast majority of Americans, especially as an educator, I would say a vast majority of our kids, the vast, vast majority, they need to have these conversations now at this age before it sprouts into the political theater we see now.
All right, final note on the Super Bowl, Ernest. People talk about how entertaining the halftime show typically is. We had left shark, right shark, and all the laughs and the visuals and whatnot. Do you think Kendrick Lamar has changed the halftime show moving forward?
That's a good question. I think it truly depends on what Jay-Z does, because as a lot of folks know, Jay-Z has this partnership, right, with the NFL. So I think when Jay-Z is choosing these people, it's for a particular purpose and particular reason. I would be curious to even know, seriously, who they can pick, hip hop, R&B, pop, whatever, that can, to me, even counter that. Because for me, the expectation is to make, not to say the whole theme is political, but to make some type of, covert statement within it. I think it depends on what Roger Goodell wants to do moving forward, because we see they play both sides of the fence a lot. We see what they did to Kaepernick, of course. But then we also see that they said they're going to keep their DEI initiatives, but then at the same time, they take away the end racism that was supposed to be on the football field. So I think we'll see what Roger Goodell does moving forward. As long as it doesn't hurt their bottom line, I don't think they'll care.
Tell us about your book on the way out here, Ernest.
Yeah, so How Black History Can Save Your Life is essentially talking about what we discussed at the intro and close about my personal life and reflections. I dealt with a hate crime in 2016 that in a lot of ways encouraged me to do more, speak out about the issues I dealt with throughout my life. I realized that racism was mainly a systemic thing, and the thing that gave me pride when fighting through it was learning my history. So I'm giving people tools to understand the system and how we can counter it together, whether you're Black, white, Latino, Indigenous, or Asian, how we can use these tools to help create a better society. It's coming out March 25th.
It must make you feel great, though, Ernest, to see the response. I mean, you have almost 500,000 followers on TikTok. You're reaching way more people, although it's maybe not as humble of work or noble as a professor, but you're reaching an awful lot of people.
Yeah, I would have never imagined when I started teaching in 2010 that my audience, overall, almost 900,000 followers, nearly 6 million people are getting my stuff a month. And I still have the opportunity. I teach still. I have an online class for kids. I speak almost every week to different audiences. So it is very humbling, but it also lets me know that it's proof that we're not learning enough of this history in school.
Well, you're easy to find. So look for Ernest Crim III, Mr. Crim, on a social media platform near you. Ernest, thank you so much for the time, my friend.
Thanks for having me.
My thanks to Mr. Crim for his insight and perspective. Audio editing for Chicago Unscripted is provided by Brian Griggs of Brian Griggs Productions. Ellie Coder produces our video content. A couple of other contributors I want to thank. Chicago vibraphonist Thaddeus Tukes. He came up with the soundtrack. And Bill Curtis kicks off each episode with the introduction. I'm Joe Donlin. I will see you on CBS News Chicago. It's available anywhere on the CBS News app. And as always, I thank you for listening to Chicago Unscripted.